also from New City Church, which is a multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic church that meets in downtown LA, founded by Korean American. So we love being in a multi-ethnic, multi-mix, because Jesus came to break down that barriers between us, amen. And also between LA and Pasadena, so we came all the way over here. So my name is Jude Tiersma Watson. I was actually born in a Dutch immigrant family, and we changed my name because my original name is Tiersma, which so some of you know how that is, to have these names, so we can say. And I was born on a dairy farm and raised on a dairy farm, and now I live. I followed God's call after being overseas. I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, and Amsterdam. I got a degree in mission from Fuller Seminary, and I thought I was going to go to Jakarta, Bangkok, or Mumbai, and God said I was moving to LA, and I was like, what? I think there's been some mistake. Like LA's like the never of my life. But you know, God knows us so much better than we know ourselves. Amen. God knows the places where we will thrive, where we can live out who He's made us to be for the sake of His kingdom in the world. And so I moved into Los Angeles. We live in a neighborhood which is just west of downtown. It's basically Westlake and MacArthur Park neighborhood. When I moved in, it was a pretty rough place, I have to say. I was part of this group called Interchange, and met Chris over 20 years ago, and Glenn, I don't know, a long time ago, when he was about that big, both as part of the ministry. And so this is the verse for Interchange, but the verse that God gave our team when we moved into the neighborhood, familiar passage, and I really prayed about it, but I thought this is really what inspired us, how God encouraged us all those early years in the 90s in LA. And Isaiah 61, and of course these are the words when Jesus inaugurates His ministry after being in the desert. These are the words that Jesus also speaks. It says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me," Isaiah 61. "Because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent us to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to give them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, instead of sadness, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair." That's what our God does. That's our God's desire for you, for me, for our neighbors. "They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of His splendor, all for the glory of God. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations." You know, when I first moved in, I didn't understand about generations. When I met Chris and lots of other people, things just went a lot slower than I expected. And, you know, we live in a society of instant everything, instant messaging, 2-year plans, 5-year plans. And so when I first met Chris, and I just, you know, oaks of righteousness don't grow overnight. And then, so as I was on my knees and I was praying, and God kept showing me all the scriptures in the Old Testament where God says, "I'm a God of generations," not 5-year plans. And oak trees are a slow-growing tree, but once they're established, they become these promised oaks of righteousness for the display of God's splendor. So I'm going to share, first I'm going to have Chris and Glenn are both going to share their stories with you for about 10 minutes each. And so Chris has lived a few years, so he's going to have to try to keep down 10 minutes. So Chris, I met Chris in 1992. He was dating someone who lived in my building. We lived in this building that actually became one of LA's worst slum houses. And we moved in to build a relationship, to share God's love, and then to see what God would do. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about that. But one of the things, so we did Bible clubs and sports. sports and all kinds of stuff. And then when the building really became a slum house, we were really led into participating in the rehab of that building to rebuild those ancient ruins, right? But it's the building in people's lives that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So in '92, I met Chris, who was dating Roxy, who was in that building. And right when I met Chris, I really sensed in my heart that he was going to have a special relationship in my life. And I have to say to you now, when I first met Chris, my biggest dream, my biggest hope was that he wouldn't shoot anyone or no one would shoot him. That's really, that's kind of like, now I can look back and I look at the years of transformation and I can talk about oaks of righteousness, but at the time I was like, okay, please, Lord, please, I hope this doesn't all just fall apart. That's because, as we know, there's just so much brokenness in the world. But, God is a God who redeems and restores and transforms. And so I'm just going to let Chris share her story, and then I'll say something more at the end. And I'm going to pass this out. Sometimes when I talk about, share this story, both Chris and Glenn have kind of a history of being, well, some people would call them taggers, we call them graffiti artists. and though they're not the same thing, I'm not saying they are, but depending on where you stand and your perspective. So this is a piece that Chris did. It says God. It's part of a larger mural. And it's just going to be a little reminder for you of today. So I'm just going to pass these around. You can keep one. Chris.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Blessings to all. This is a nice church. It's really personal, glad, and also it's a very small church. If you see it, it's large. And I'm kind of like, very I'm an introvert person, so I like small groups. So my wife is, after church, she's like talking to everyone, and I was kind of like, it's good to be here. Yes. Last night I couldn't sleep. I've been having some problems. I was depressed for about a year due to bought a house and the economy just kind of went down, and so we're buying a house and all of a sudden everything is people losing homes and we're getting a house. I'm like, how am I going to make it? It's a long story, but I just prayed last night. I said to myself, you know what? This is a good time for me to just pray all night. So I just prayed and I feel really good about it. So my life starts, I was born in Guatemala, 1971, I'm 40 more years old. And I grew up, up until, the recollection of what I'd known in my family. I was 4 months when my father and mother decided to, take their own ways. After I was born, a year later, they reconciled and they had another baby. They broke up. My grandma kept both myself and my brother. She left. My mom left for another 2 years, came back, and they had another child. 1976, this is when I started, just a year before I started to recollect memories of, what my life has been like. So I remember 76, in the middle of the night, a big earthquake happened in Guatemala City. 23,000 people died, and we lost 6 relatives. 2 of them were my brothers, sleeping in the same bed. I was the only one to survive. That was kind of like the first, challenge and the first traumatic experience in my life. Did not kind of realize that my brother had passed away until I was maybe 20, 21. When it started to sink in, it was like, he's my younger brother, whom I used to hang out with a lot. I started working at the age of 8 years old as in a body shop fixing cars and things. My father decided to leave the country in 1985, and it took him about a year to travel. He was well economically. He had a shop that he owned. He was doing very well, but he was, a person that read a lot. I think he went to school up to like 8th grade, but he was very kind of intellectual. He loved reading and experimenting with things, and so he decided, he read a couple books that kind of inspired him to travel. So he left the country, and following that, he's got 5 brothers and sisters, and so after that, every year someone left. After he came, it took him about a year to establish himself here in the U.S. He moved to East Los Angeles, and after that, around that time, I had been sexually abused when I was about 6 and maybe 14. And of course, there's a lot of anger in my family. A lot of, I don't know where it comes from, but there was a lot of, beatings that really kind of disturbing. To sometimes now I'm still dealing with it. Very traumatic beatings. So growing up, I grew up with a lot of anger and kind of asking myself, where's God in this situation? I became a Christian sometime in 80, maybe 83, 84. I gave myself to God. I actually did it because I thought that this would please my grandmother. I just said, I'm going to become a Christian. So she'll be happy with me. She'll stop beating me up. And it didn't change actually. It got worse. Well, anyway, so I moved on. My father and my uncle, who were the kind of like the solid people in the house, left, and I was becoming a teenager. All of a sudden, I joined a local gang, and started using drugs, started learning how to use drugs, and roaming around the neighborhood. When all of a sudden, I found myself in this life. My grandmother couldn't control me anymore. I was a boy, and in Guatemala, females and males are positionally different in society. So I was kind of like growing up, and I'm a man. But things just weren't wrong. I was going to get murdered by a police officer. One night they were taking me out of school, and with two of his friends. Around that time, I lied to my father. I was scared of my life, and I said, I need to leave the country. Can I go visit you for a year? He sent me some money. There were some people that were traveling from El Salvador, so I just joined them. And I said, I'm going to the U.S. I took off in the spring of early, I think it was February of '89. I came here in '89. I stayed home for about 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, I found myself working at a body shop. I was only 17, and working from 8 to 9, from 8 to 5. I had all these, things I had to be responsible for, pay my rent. I had to pay for gas for people to give me a ride to work. So I found myself, I thought I was coming to go to school here, and then all of a sudden I was working. At this point, I kind of, fell into this situation where, I was a teenager. I wanted to fit in the crowd. I used to go to the arcades to play video games and try to find friends. But most of them spoke English. I mean, there were kids who were going to school, who were already being established here. So one of the things I thought to myself, the goal would be to kind of fit in, to find a way to fit in. So I started skating. I bought a skateboard from a kid in the neighborhood. And so I found this group of kids that used to skate at a parking lot. And every time they left, I would come with my board and try to practice what they were doing. I could never achieve that. So then one night I was caught up with this guy. All of a sudden he comes back. He comes in and he's like, hey, he spoke to me in English. He asked me, have you seen the guys that skate here? And I said, no, it's all right. I didn't understand. So he said, hey, would you want to join me? I said, sure, man. It was about 9 p.m. We started skating. I met the guys, and I noticed there were graffiti writers. I met one of the biggest names, graffiti writers. His name was Shaka. I don't know if you remember him. In '89, he became very famous. I hang out with him, and I kind of got a little bit of influence from him. So working, and then at night I become a skater. On the weekends, so I would just get my skateboard and travel all over the city to different places. Then, I was kicked out of my uncle's house. My dad kicked me out because I was skating too late. Then I ended up with my aunts. All of a sudden, I found myself on the streets, because they didn't want me anymore. At this point, I said to myself, skating had become kind of like my addiction. I was just kind of trying to fit in. I moved from East LA, and I was kicked out from my dad's house, and I moved on to the just west side of Los Angeles. And then at that point, I met a group of kids from Thailand, and one was from Indonesia. And they spoke a little Spanish, and I spoke some English, so we just and skated over town. But at this point, I started using drugs, and I found myself kind of living in the street. Roxy, my wife. We've been together for about 21 years this year. It's just been a blessing to me. Roxy had known Jude for about, 5 years. 5 years, since the 80s. And that's the building she was ministering. So her mom and Roxy lived in that building. And so to this point, I'm using drugs and I'm just kind of rolling around. On this side of town, the scene of skating had died a little bit. And the kids, they had families, so they wouldn't allow them to, they would skate from about 6 p.m. to about 7. And they had to go back home. And for me, it was like 7 had just been, my day just started off as, I'm going to go skate. One day I was feeling, I've never celebrated my birthday, so I was feeling really down. And I found some spray paint in my job, and so I took them home. And that night I said, nobody really cares about me. I was feeling really off, I didn't feel loved. I never felt love in my life. So I started writing my actual name on the walls, And this, I was like, I started to, on the morning, I took the bus and I was like, hey, that's me. People will start recognizing me. That was my mentality, right? At this time, I want to become famous. And all of a sudden, I met a kid who, I had my tag name on the back of my board, and he says, oh, you don't want to be writing this. And I said, oh, I need to get you my team. And the thing he offered me was kind of like the game. You're going to have friends, girlfriends, and a family, basically. So I said, sure, I joined you. So I became the leader of this group because I was like, I didn't have parents, so from 7 until like 5 p.m. in the morning, I was tagging all over LA, South Central, East LA. It was just like, the thing about graffiti, it became an addiction. I'm a very addictive person because I never learned discipline in my life. Because no parents, I had to just live my own life. So what happened at this time, between 1992 and 96, kind of like a war broke down between, graffiti was kind of like skating. Just, hey, what's your name, this, that. Okay, they want to tag with me? Sure, no problem. Some people had problems with each other, but it was good. The gangs were the ones who had guns and owned the territory. Correct? That's graffiti writers or taggers. It was just something like, I want to see my name all over the place, like a billboard. I just said, put my name all over the place. The satisfaction that it brought to me personally was that every time I stepped on a wall and I was about to write, I had to look out for myself. And that's remember one time I was in Koreatown, and for a few seconds I thought, why am I doing this? Should I stop doing this? I was already into it. People were getting killed at this time. And I said, I really don't care about going to jail tonight. I just said, I had this perspective of jail, and like in the movies when those two guys are talking to each other, hey man. That was my perspective, right? Because there are no reality shows. Now when they have reality shows, they show you what really happens in the jail. So I had this, I want to have food. One thing, I'm going to have a friend to talk to all night if I want to. I'm going to have someone that cares about. So then, of course, I didn't stop. I said, I don't care really going to jail. All of a sudden, this friend died. Then this other guy got killed. Then this other guy got killed. And all of a sudden, this tag banging war broke down. And people were getting murdered all over the place. Now, at this time, I'm asking God, I really need to get out of this. And I just didn't know how. The addiction was so heavy that I just couldn't, I would come to Jude's room and just hide all over the place. That's how the addiction part, right? It's just an addiction to me. But suddenly, I came to church. Jude said, you need to stop going out to the streets. I had a hard time going out to the streets. But I had a dream, and God spoke to me with this voice that I can't describe to you. It stayed in my heart and soul for a long time. Very sweet voice. The question was, if you go out tomorrow, would you still, what's going to happen to you? Like the question, evangelizing question, what's going to happen to your soul once you die tomorrow? So I said, that morning I woke up, I went to a church, and I said, I need to reconcile with the Lord. When I walked, it's kind of like you're training yourself in. I walked into the temple of God, and I said, Lord, this is me, this is all my addictions. Here I am, take all. Of course, I walked back to my seat, and I kind of hesitated on the prayer and the fact that I gave my life to Christ truly from the deep inside my heart. And things, like Jude said, the progress has been slow but steady. And today, I'm happy to say that, I've been married for 15 years. I have two beautiful children. One is 7, very good student, and my baby is only 6 months. And my wife and I was a wonderful person. She's a teacher at one of the schools, local schools near Central Los Angeles. I was going to school to become a teacher, but my depression, so many things have been obstacles to my life. But Jude, interchange through Jude, have been kind of the ministry who kind of, when I needed help, they were there for me financially, mostly spiritually, financially sometimes when I was down. And Jude has been kind of like, she's like a mother to me. A place where, when I feel depressed or lonely, she's kind of like my refuge as an internal part of my life in Los Angeles. And I mean, it's been a journey for me. It hasn't been easy. God's still at work. And as I was praying last night, I was saying, God, use me as an instrument of your peace. And thank you for listening. There's a lot more things that I could say and more time. Now, for me, my journey has led me to, I was broken. I grew up without parents, and I see a lot of that still happening nowadays. And at some point in my life, Jude and I started praying, God, maybe, so I looked at television, sociology. I took a class in sociology, and we looked at how the roles of males in the U.S. or in other countries play out to me. And a lot of times, your friends, your father has an idea of how you should be a man. But at some point, you have to realize, God, here I am. Can you make me to the man, the godly man that you meant to be in my life? That has led me to the generational part, like Abraham. When he turned himself in, he said to God, here's my son. And he was willing for God to take him. God gave him back to him, and he transformed us, all of us. And for me, my transformation comes in generations through my sons. I wanted to be able to be, one thing I pray for them is to love God with all their hearts. And to be the godly men that God meant to be. And that is my job right now. I'm teaching my son a lot of things. Some of the things that my dad never taught me, I'm always praying, God, teach me more so that I can teach my sons how to be good men in this world and make a difference. The new generations to come.
Amen.
So usually when I do this, I only run one person, but they're both artists, and this is how this whole conversation got started. So today we also get to hear from Glenn. Glenn is kind of the next generation. I think Glenn met Chris when he was just a kid, and I'll let him share his own story because I don't believe that we can speak for people. They have a voice and can speak for themselves.
My name's Glenn. I grew up in the neighborhood that Chris ended up interchange. So that's how I met Chris, through interchange. And I remember growing up and hearing all the stories that he had about graffiti. And he did make it seem like something that was great, when in reality it turns out that it's not as great as people think it is.
But you got us.
But it was definitely fun for the ride. And I met Jude through interchange when I was like, 5? I was in elementary school. I don't know, long story. Very long story. But that was, 15 years ago. And what should I say? I wrote this for my church a year ago, so it fits for that specific situation. I guess I should just before I met God, my life was running towards hell. I was, vandalism, drug abuse, violence, drug dealing. After I met God, I threw all of that away. When in reality, God pushed it all away. And most people, most of you know me as Glenn Bob, but I grade, a family member sexually abused me. And honestly, I thought it was a special bond I had with the person. And it went on for a few years. When it finally stopped, I thought it was my fault. I felt guilty. And she was telling me to hide it and forget about it. I didn't know God then. Everything kind of went downhill from there. I was the only white kid at basically any school that I ever went to. And I ended up being jumped and harassed basically every day for a long time. Then eventually I got switched into a charter school for middle school, and I started hanging out with a cool crowd. Then these turned out to be future gang members. That's how graffiti started. It was a bunch of kids at my school, and then the stories that I heard from Chris that made it seem like a thing to do. So, they were all Salvadorians. They were future MS gang members, which was a notorious Salvadorian gang. And I couldn't be totally into the same crowd because they were Salvadorians and I was a white Mexican kid. So I started graffiti with 4 other guys. I was always sketching in class. My mom would get mad because that's all I would ever do, even at home. My mom came from a strict Mexican background, so she forbade me from sketching at home or at school. Eventually I rebelled and I sketched every possible time. And I would catch my texts after school. It was pretty much my life, little by little. It turned into failing every class because I was sketching all day. I couldn't focus on anything, but when I was sketching, I finally found something I cared about, something that I could pour my attention to. Little by little I got better at it. My style was a bit more graffiti-ish. But I ended up in the street doing bigger and better things, to the point where I was out there every day, non-stop, markers in my pockets, grabbing spray paint, going from my block to Wilshire in Vermont, catching tag after tag after tag. At 19, I got caught, finally. I went to the graffiti shop that day to buy paint and markers. On my way home, a friend called me and said if I wanted to hang out with him and 2 other friends. So I joined them later on. We were at his house. He had decided to go catch his check since he had really got it. It was Friday. So while we were waiting for him to catch his check, I decided to catch a tag on the phone. When I turned around to walk back to my friends, I was handcuffed by a detective who happened to be at the right place at the right time. It was useless to run, but at the end he ended up letting me go. All that went through my mind was one question: did God let me go, or was I just that lucky? It was just a year into a Christian lifestyle, but that day changed my life, just changed the way that I thought. I quit the life I was living. There was lots of drug use and alcoholism. That kind of lifestyle gave me an escape. I answered to no one, and nothing really mattered. Life just happened. That's just how it was. Throughout life, I had 2 mentors that have been there. They're like father figures to me, but I never really paid attention to either. They were always telling me what to do, and I didn't like that. Paul Smith worked for Interchange. He had a touring program on Monday nights. There was also Harry. I met him when I was 8. The religious point of view changed me so that when I got older, when I really wanted to change my lifestyle, the words came in. And all I could hear Harry say was, finally, stop being this stupid little kid. But for me, meeting God was a gradual experience of transformation. I was already coming to New City because of Jonathan, one of my assistant pastors there. The only thing I remember was walking in every Sunday, and the second I got to the door, I felt depressed. I felt bad. I didn't know what it was, and it kind of clicked one day. Pastor Kevin's sermon finally got to me. It was a particular thing he said. It was something like, it doesn't matter that you sin, it's the fact that you want to change. It made me feel like a hypocrite, because I was going to church, yet I was going back home Sunday evening and like drinking beers and catching tags at the road with nothing. At the time I had a lifelong friend, someone I grew up with. He lived in the same building as Paul Smith, which is Cambria, with Interchange has been a part of. His nickname was Dark. I told him I was going to church. They had me tagging for about 2 months. I wanted to keep it that way. I don't want the lifestyle anymore, I told him. He got mad and pushed me away. It broke our friendship. We're enemies now. It's been 4 long, bitter years. part of me felt ripped out, and I wasn't ready to talk about it with anybody, with my mom. So when she came home that night, I walked out and said I'd be back. I walked around for about an hour and cried. It was weird. He was like a brother, someone I could trust. We did everything together, catch tags, we grew up together, we smoked together, we skated together. And through all of that, I thought he would always be there. I guess I was wrong. Now I think that God took him away so that I could see that the lifestyle wasn't going to get me anywhere. He showed me that Darks wasn't my brother. I wasn't angry with God. It's over with Darks. I don't really feel anything for him anymore, but it's like a cut. You know, it heals after a while, and all you have is the scars left to remember it by. As for God, all I can do is thank him. He guided me through my mistakes. He was there even though I never acknowledged him. When I see God now, he's a father, a brother, a mentor. He's everything. It's bittersweet, my story. Bitter because I had to go through all of that to be able to change. And it's sweet at the same time because if he didn't change me, I would have ended up worse. It's always been one of my biggest fears that I might have gone deeper into that lifestyle. And I've met a few people throughout my life who said that drinking and a few 40s and catching tags wasn't that bad. But it's not just that. I know what I'm capable of. I was embracing all of that evil, all that anger. I knew that eventually I would have hurt myself or maybe even somebody else. I might have done something very, very stupid. I don't think I'll ever be ready to fully tell my story. I've learned to always hide my life from everybody and to think about opening up to everybody, especially people I literally don't know. That's just something I don't do. Darks didn't know my story. And my mother didn't know about sexual abuse till a year ago that I told her when I did this. But if I wasn't ready to change for God, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have changed.
I really want to thank each of them for being willing to come up and share their stories. And, you know, I think that we can never hear enough of the power of God to transform lives. Because so often, so much in the world tells us things can't change, and so often we believe that things can't change. But in the end, we don't change anyone. You know, we don't change. We can't change ourselves. We can't change our neighbors. We're faithful to what God has called us to, and then He comes in, right, with that power to transform. And I guess the thing is, I have a number of things that I was thinking about sharing. I guess what I would say is that God's power at work isn't only about, so I moved into a neighborhood from this kind of stable Christian immigrant family, and God has changed me as much as He's changed anybody else. Because it's about all of us, isn't it? It's not about those people over there who need God's transforming power. It's about all of us. It's about all of us who need to invite God to continue to transform. You know, one of the things I think about again and again, and part of the reason I love being at a multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic church, because it reminds me of the truth that I always believe, that there's no platforms at the cross of Jesus. There are no platforms at the cross of Jesus. Nobody's a little bit higher than another. But sometimes when we're living life in our ordinary kind of ways, and we have a certain kind of job, a certain kind of income, somehow society might treat us like we're something. But in fact, the matter is, we're all the same at the cross. At the foot of the cross, we're all the same. We all need what I needed that in my life too. I just didn't see it as well. And what happens when we move into certain kind of, what happened to me when I moved into the neighborhood, all the kind of nice things that God had protected my life just stripped away. And all of a sudden we see things for what they truly are. And some of you can know that experience. And so I'm going to end with what right now is one of my guiding scriptures. When I first moved into the neighborhood, when I first met Glenn and Chris, I could not have imagined what God would do. And it's not just what God does in their lives. I see the ripple, and it's true for all of us, right? The ripple effect that goes out for all of life. I could not have imagined it, but we serve the God who is able to do immeasurably more